Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1723. The topic is Q&A and the title is, How Long Should I Rest Between Sets? So this came from a listener. They're not a client of mine, but I am going to discuss this as well, focused towards my clients. But we'll talk about some general concepts and then we'll kind of go from there. So, how long should you rest between working sets of an exercise? The kind of summary response is, what's the desired outcome of the exercise? What do I mean by that? Well, for my clients, we usually start our workouts with some type of mobility prep or movement prep work. And these are circuits, usually 2 or 3 exercises, that's intended to focus on shoulder mobility, core strength, and hip mobility as well. So we try to focus on the shoulders, the core, and the hips. Make sure the person feels open and ready and equal everywhere in regards to muscular tightnesses, so that way they can move through the upcoming major lifts with less wear and tear on the joints, less strain, just feel more free to move. The one way I kind of think of it is like if I have a puppet on strings, and some of the strings are tied in knots. They're shortened. They're tied in knots. Now, puppets can move, but he's going to move kind of weird, right? Well, if I've been sitting all day and my hip flexors are super tight, then I might move weirdly as I go through some of my bigger, heavier lifts. If my glutes are super tight, my hamstrings are super tight because I've been standing all day, well, that tightness is going to end up causing extra pull and strain on the lower back. If the person's doing, like, for example, squats or deadlifts or lower body workout or variations like that. So having the muscles around the joints feel evened out in regards to openness and fluidity of motion, it's going to help reduce stress on the joints. It's going to improve overall technique quality in the main lifts, so that way the major targeted muscles get the brunt of the stress rather than secondary muscles or unintended muscles or the joints themselves. So I really like having that mobility prep, those warm-up kind of circuits. And for those, the idea of that is to be moving fast enough that you get a sweat going, there's some muscle burning, there's a degree of stress. This helps our body start to produce endorphins and adrenaline, which helps our workout. Endorphins are natural painkillers, and adrenaline is natural focus. So these are kind of hormone compounds that our body will produce that can improve the overall experience of the workout and our overall performance. It helps us maintain focus, and it helps us kind of feel more aggressive towards the movements rather than going, oh my gosh, this all hurts and I feel miserable. But we don't want to be moving so fast that I'm so out of breath that I can't maintain proper technique during those exercises. So mobility prep, warm-up circuits, stuff like that, is you're going to have a pretty continual pace. I mean, I would be surprised if you're taking a full 1 minute rest anywhere in there. It's pretty quick. And the idea is again, it get a little bit of sweat, a little bit of burning, a little bit of stress, gets those endorphins and adrenaline start producing, but you take enough of a rest that you're not going a million miles an hour through the movements. Now, again, we're talking about rest. So when I say a short rest, I don't mean you have to go fast through the movements. I'm not talking about the speed of the movements. I'm talking about the time you take between the movements. That's important to know because sometimes when people think there's a short rest, they feel like they have to move faster during the exercises, and that's not true. You still want to maintain whatever the proper speed for the exercise you're doing is. But as in regards to a rest period, you would take a relatively short rest. And part of that is none of those movements are very heavy. They're not overly stressful. Now, I know you're going to be like, yeah, right, that was really freaking hard the other day that I did XYZ. Yeah, it's going to be hard, but it's not weight load stressful on the CNS. So our body's ability to recover from movement prep work and warm-up circuits and stuff is a much lower demand need, so therefore we can move at a quicker pace. A contrast to that would be, let's say, strength lifts. Let's say you're doing really heavy squat, bench, deadlift, maybe some strongman events, if you're doing farmer's carries, yoke walks, things like that. I typically program for my clients 3 to 5 minutes. For some of my clients, depending on their own conditioning and the type of movement we're doing, I might program 5 to 8 minutes, but it's usually going to be somewhere between 3 to 8 minutes in most cases. Now, the idea of that, the purpose of that rest period, I consider those to be long rest periods, 3 to 8 minutes. The purpose is to ensure that there's no aerobic stress that's going to impact technique quality or performance. So if we're doing heavy squats, if I'm trying to do heavy triples, doubles, or singles, I don't want to be so out of breath that I can't maintain proper thoracic tightness because I'm taking such deep, fast breaths, right? So we don't want to be so fast that aerobic stress becomes an inhibitor of our performance. And you need more time for the CNS to recover between big lifts. What this is like kind of excitability. If you were to explosively jump as high as you possibly can, say you're doing a vertical jump test, and then I told you, okay, like maybe you jumped, and as soon as you landed, I'm like, jump again, and you jumped again, and I said, jump again, and you're like, oh my God, and you frantically jump 3, 4, 5 times right in a row. Those jumps are actually going to get lower and lower and lower. The ability for the body to exert all-out maximal force will decrease if the time between the exertions of maximal force is not long enough. So one of the concepts that this is a trouble with is if somebody's working on getting stronger, and they're like, yeah, I'm doing like really heavy singles at maybe 85, 90%. Maybe you don't even have a clue what that really means. But you're doing some heavy, like 1 rep, 2 rep, maybe even 3 rep sets. And in 1 minute, you're like, oh, I feel fine. I'm just going to go again. No. You might not know it yet because the person is new to strength training, but they would need longer than 1 minute. Sometimes I'll have people do this short rest at submaximal weight loads to practice technique in an exhausted state. So for example, I might have somebody do deadlift singles. So they might do 85% of their max. We might do 6 sets of 1 with 1 minute rest in between. The intent of that is by set number 4, 5, and 6, they're out of breath, their performance is decreasing, but I want to see if they can still maintain good technique, focus, and quality, even in a fatigued state. But it allows me to see what a 1 rep max fatigued state is at only 85%. So I don't get as much joint stress and overall CNS stress then I have to modify and account for in their overall programming for other lifts. So, for example, if I want to practice technique at an exhausted 1 rep max state in deadlift, it's better for me to do that at a lighter weight load so I don't then have to decrease the weight load we can use in squats. I can still have them squat heavy. So, as the person who writes the programming, there are times where I would actually want the aerobic stress to be a potential limiter in technique. I'm not going to make the rest so short that there's no possible way they can do the technique with good quality. I'm going to make it short enough that they're going to be a little annoyed by being out of breath. And they might actually have to kind of sit down or kneel down or really go like that, like deep breaths between some of the work. So there are times where, from a programmer's perspective, you would violate some of these rules intentionally. But as a general rule of thumb, when you're doing big strength lifts, I would have the rest range somewhere between 3 to 8 minutes. It ensures that aerobic stress does not become a limiting factor. It allows the CNS more time to recover for excitability, all-out maximal effort. But it's not so long that it allows blood and kind of heat to leave the working muscles in the joints. We don't want the body to start to feel like it's cooling down. And you have to kind of get warmed back up between each lift. And you don't want it to be so long of a rest that you lose focus, which allows your endorphin and your adrenaline to reduce. So if you play on your phone and you're texting somebody and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, it's 12 minutes later, that will not be a good overall practice to do. Number one, you're going to be in the gym way too damn long. This is why powerlifters say, oh, I'm in the gym 2 hours or 3 hours. And it's like, your programming sucks. That's why. Or you're just not following the rest periods the way your coach is writing them. But there's no need for somebody to be in the gym that long even if it is like a strength-based workout. Now, you might choose to, if you enjoy being in the gym, you might choose to do that. But if somebody says, oh, I couldn't do a powerlifting, the workouts were taking 3 hours, so I just gave up. And it's like, oh, you could have got better programming and you wouldn't have had to been in the gym 3 hours, But that's the idea of strength lifts, somewhere between 3 to 8 minutes, and you want to not feel limited by aerobic recovery. There you go. Now, when we think about muscle damaging lifts or exercises, and this would be like bodybuilding or body shaping, and it might be the accessories for strength athletes, the stuff you do after the main lifts. Typically, our rest periods for these are going to be somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes. And again, that kind of depends on, for me, it depends on my clients. Like I write all the rest periods specific to their needs and their abilities and stuff. But usually 2 to 5 minutes is a pretty good range. And it's kind of the same purpose for strength, is you don't want the aerobic recovery to become a limiting factor. You don't want the CNS to get worn out to where the quality decreases, but you don't want it too long to where they lose focus or they feel like they're cooling down. The reason why these are shorter, like 2 to 5 minutes rather than 3 to 8, is just since the weight load is lighter in accessory lifts and bodybuilding lifts, then your CNS doesn't require as much time to recover excitability. If we think about endurance exercises, like endurance for muscle endurance or cardiovascular endurance, then you're typically going to want to do, if you're doing a blend, say you want muscle endurance and aerobic endurance, or you just want muscle endurance. Obviously, if it's aerobic endurance, you're going to be out of breath, yes. But if it's muscle endurance or a blend of the two, then our resting periods usually average between 1 to 2 minutes, or I use what's called a muscle cardio circuit structure, and this is all my own terminology, is we're moving muscles to create cardio effect. So muscle cardio circuit. We do a 1 to half to 1 to 2 time ratio. What this means is, if I have them do 1 exercise, 2 exercises, 3 exercises, whatever it is, however long it takes them to do a working set for all the exercises. So maybe there's 2 exercises. The first exercise takes 40 seconds. They get into the next exercise. That one takes 30 seconds. And they look at their watch and they're like, okay, it took me about 1.5 minutes to do a working set of each exercise. Well, then they get half to 2 times that amount of rest. So it would be 45 seconds up to 3 minutes to rest. What happens is, if they need longer than 3 minutes, I want them to reduce the weight load, because we're focusing too much on the muscular part of the balance between muscle endurance and aerobic endurance. If they don't even need half the time of rest, then they're not going heavy enough. So a rest period of half to 2 times the amount of time it takes to do the working sets for the exercises is a really good work to rest ratio when you're trying to blend muscular endurance and aerobic endurance. So that's a good kind of rule of thumb. The idea of that is that both should die at the same time. Your muscles should be screaming, your lungs should be screaming, and they're both equally miserable. So the general guidelines for how long should I rest between sets. The heavier you lift, the longer rest you need, even though it's probably going to be lower reps. So rest period doesn't relate to reps. Rest period relates to weight load used, and it's perceived weight load. So what's heavy for you, not what's heavy for anybody else, right? So the heavier you lift, the longer the rest you need due to CNS recovery, excitability demand recovery, and the importance of technique quality being injury prevention. If you go too fast, you don't perform with good technique, you get hurt. Then the lighter weight you use, you need less CNS recovery, and there's less injury prevention needed in regards to technique quality retention. You still want to maintain best technique possible, but it's not like, okay, if I move 1/4 of an inch out of the way, I'm going to snap my spine in half. So there's a little more wiggle room for technique to be a little more variable with lighter weight loads. So if you're one of my clients, follow the program. I do personalize rest periods for each individual I work with based on their recovery capacity and based on a kind of blended percentage of what I want them to achieve from the the combination of the movements and the workout entirely. So if I want them to get stronger, but we really need to increase their overall volume tolerance, I might push the pace of the workout faster because I really need that workout volume tolerance to get higher to eventually gain more strength. If they are already strong and they're peaking towards, say, the powerlifting meet or a strongman competition, then I might have the workout be really slow because I truly want them to maximize the excitability output of the CNS. I'm not trying to work on volume at that time. So I make everything very intentional for my clients. So if you're one of my clients, follow the time periods given in the program. If you're not one of my clients, you can follow these concepts that we discussed and kind of that general rule of thumb: the heavier it is, the longer the rest; the lighter it is, the less of the rest. Okay, so that's quick, easy answer. Hopefully that makes some sense. A lot of it you can tell is going to be trial and error, just making sure that you remember that basic question: what's the desired outcome of the exercise? If it's purely strength, make sure aerobic doesn't get in the way. If you want some blend of aerobic capacity, conditioning or volume pushing in the workout to burn more calories, then you're probably going to want to move at a faster pace. Awesome. Well, if you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and please follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.